Hello, Xavier here, and I'm back again with another YouTube sharing. So in today's episode, I will be talking about this article which I came across from Bloomberg, which explained that the Singapore dollar was actually the top performing currency in the last 2 years and should continue to outperform the rest of the region's currency in the second half of this year. And I feel this is exactly the reason why Singaporeans who own properties or even foreigners and PRs who own property are actually feeling the second wealth effect from purchasing a property in Singapore. Not just from capital appreciation over the years, but also purely from the fact that our currency, has outperformed other countries by miles, which we'll see later. All right. So in this article, you see that the expert actually says that it will continue to do so. Why? Because we are actually a very net import country. We don't have any natural resources. And because also our country, I think in general, when we compare to other countries, we are still performing quite well. We can afford our currency to be more expensive as compared to the rest. So by tweaking the exchange rate, and you know that we use exchange rate as our main monetary policy tool. So by tweaking the exchange rate to be higher, we can actually control this high inflation issue that has been, bugging everyone in the last, 2-3 years. So that would continue to be so, and anyone holding a Singapore property, I think, will be a great, beneficiary out of this entire outcome. Okay, so let's examine further as I analyze how much, our property has actually increased when we look in terms of the currency appreciation. So if you look over here, I think a good comparison would be our immediate neighbor, Malaysia. Since 20 years ago, this is just purely Singapore dollar to Malaysian dollar. We know 20 years ago, or even 30, 40 years ago, it was on parity 1:1. But if we simply took 20 years ago and 10 years ago, it's actually appreciated by 75 and 40% respectively. I think that's a very credible amount, and later when I put that into numbers, you will actually see how powerful it is if just purely holding cash in our bank as a Singaporean as compared to, let's say, a Malaysian with the same amount of money they are in a Malaysian bank. We have actually done so much better as compared to them. All right, so this is Malaysia. And of course, you look at Australia. I took some of these countries which are more familiar to us, whether we are sending our kids, some of us study there, we have our second family, our relatives and everything all over in Australia and New Zealand, right? So these very familiar countries, and many of us have done investments over there. So you can see over 10, 20 years, it's roughly the same, but it's a substantial increase, Singapore dollars compared to the Aussie dollar is 45%. That's a lot of money. You look at Japan, Singapore's favorite destination, right? From 20 years ago to 10 years ago, the Singapore dollar has always been increasing. And if you look at the latest one over here, I took this maybe a couple of months ago, but in fact now it actually reached all the way, if I'm not wrong, up to 119 per Sing dollar. But I know it have dropped down a bit, but it's still above 115. So this 1110 is not even fully reflective of the current currency conversion, all right, between Sing dollar and Japanese yen. Then we also look at our favorite UK, where some of us study down there, and we have some of us that own property in UK too. So over the 20 years period, there's an 80% increase Sing dollar as compared to the Great Britain pound. That's a lot of money. Last time it's like, 1 pound is a 3 Sing dollar. And now I think it's around 1.6, 1.7, right? So it has really decreased by a fair bit, the UK pound. We talk about currency, and at the same time, we also must look at whether the property has also appreciated in the other country, right? If you want to compare. So I didn't use the URA PPI because I thought I just Googled this, and when I'm comparing between all the different countries, this particular economic data site actually gives some data about the property price index. So I can use this quite homogeneously for all the 4 countries that are listed. All right, so Singapore, you can see since 2005 up to now, it's already around 147% increase. You can look at Malaysia, it's actually not too bad. Wow, it's 170% increase. You more than double and almost triple. So, but you look at that in relation to currency, the depreciation in their currency when you convert it back to Sing dollar, whether you actually made money. Okay, even though you have increased by 170%, I think you guys know where I'm leading to, but you'll see the numbers later. Okay, and Australia also powerful, right? 166%. If you look at Japan, it's 22%. Why? Because I think during the 2000, it was already an economic power, and they went through a period whereby they call it a lost decade, something like that, where the economic activity was very, very slow. So even though they actually went up quite high, there's some kind of revival in the last maybe 5 to 10 years. But overall, when you compare the last 20 years, because it was considered a high 20 years ago, the increase is only 22%. Okay, so this is quite interesting. Timing is quite important. You also look at the United Kingdom, right? It's also around 90% in United Kingdom. I mean, I took all these values. It's just a general guide. So, of course, we have to pick the best one in certain cities, tier 1 cities, certain zone, for example, zone 1, 2, 3. In London, you probably want to look at zone 1, 2. So there's different little segments, but I'm just using it as a gauge to really understand how currency, affects the value of your property purchase, right? Okay, so when I put all this together, you'll come up with this table down here, which actually explains how important the role of Forex is in property purchase. Okay, can we just look at the first column over here? Okay. Let's say, I think this is an analogy. Okay, let's say 20 years ago, if you have 1 million Sing dollar, okay, if you have 1 million Sing dollar and you decided to leave it in the bank in Singapore, of course, 20 years, you don't do anything. At the end of 20 years, what will you get? Of course, you'll still get back $1 million. And again, this is a very, very simple illustration. So it's without interest. I know you live in some fixed D whatsoever. Yes, I recognize that. But let's just look at it quite simply. So to take out some of this little effect here and there, okay, to really understand the whole idea that I'm trying to explain. So at the end of 20 years, you still have $1 million. But let's say 20 years ago, from the $1 million, you converted it into ringgit and left it inside Malaysia. And let's say it doesn't draw any interest. At the end of 20 years, when you take that $1 million ringgit equivalent and convert it back to Singapore, because of the depreciation in the Malaysian dollar, you realize that you are left with how much? Only 570,000. So these are in numbers. Just now I already showed you the percentage change in the currency. And it's the same if you do that for Australia, Japan, and United Kingdom. So actually just by the pure fact that you don't do anything, or you simply just buy, if your HDB never even really increased, which although it did in the last 20 years, you're actually already in a much better state as compared to citizens of the other country. That's what I want to highlight. So I think on this end, it's just for me as a Singaporean, sometimes you just want to show gratitude and really very thankful of the situation that we are in, just purely without doing anything, just living in a bank with no interest, nothing. All right, you're already so much more well off as compared to them. But let's say if you bought a property, so this is interesting. So purely use the $1 million, no loan, nothing. You pay full in cash. You buy a property in Singapore for $1 million 20 years ago. Because of the appreciation of the property of more than 100% 20 years ago, just now you saw the chart. At the end of 20 years, right, the value of your property is almost 2.5 million. But let's say if that 1 million, the same 1 million you bought a property in Malaysia, yes, you also get back the same, but in Malaysian dollar, because it's in their own currency, because it also went up quite substantially, almost similar to Singapore, you gain around 2.7 million ringgit. Correct? Same for Australia, Japan, and UK. But when we factor in currency effect, so at the end of these 20 years, yes, your property may appreciate to 2.7 million in ringgit, but when you convert it back to Singapore dollar, because of the depreciation, you realize that in Singapore dollar term, your property is only 1.5 million for Malaysia property. If you bought a Malaysia property 20 years ago, for Australian property you bought 20 years ago is 1.8. And the worst is Japan, because the appreciation of the property is only, just now you saw, only 22%. Plus the fact that it has depreciated so much against the Sing dollar, you're only left with 700,000 after 20 years. Even though, again, the property may appreciated by 22%. So if you look at all these numbers as compared to the 2.47 million that they are holding right now, well, it's a huge disparity, right? So you're not just, again, gaining from the property increase, but the pure fact that you're holding the property in Singapore, this property is in Singapore, whether it's a HDB, non-landed condo, or whether it's a landed, wow, you are so much better off than all your neighbors, right? And I can say we are just very lucky and blessed to be born in Singapore. So this is the effect that I'm talking about, and that I want to highlight, and also the fact that why more foreigners are really looking to park their money here for the fact that it's safer, and because our currency is that strong, right? And if not, again, for the 60% ABSD, I'm pretty sure there will be more foreigners buying our property, and the property prices will be even higher as compared to now. So this is interesting, but you'll be saying, hey, Xavier, you're always saying that this we should look at it more forward-looking. Yeah, right. So where should we go from here? Do you actually think that Singapore will continue to be attractive, and do you think our currency in this case will continue to be stronger, or at least hold its position? If you ask me, I'm definitely very optimistic about Singapore in the next, at least in the next 10 to 20 years, in terms of its growth and how you're going to attract even better talents into Singapore. Why do I say so? If you just look at this chart. Okay, first up, in 2030, you'll be surprised that in Southeast Asia, we will have a country that will be top 5 in the world by GDP. So I took this from the internet. I think this is some data by Standard Chartered doing some forecasting. So Indonesia will be number 4. And that's after, the common names China, India, which is also in Asia per se. And we are already having very strong economic ties with them. And of course, USA is always there. They are strongest and they're bigger. It's just that they don't have as big a population as China and India. But Indonesia, it's up and coming, and it's Southeast Asia, and we are literally surrounded by them. So moving forward, definitely, I think Singapore will benefit a lot to continue to attract, the talents, where even though we might have a slower birth rates, even though we might have declining young population, but the pure fact that we can actually be the central hub, like what you're doing now, and continue to attract the best talents over here, with good immigration policies, I think we'll definitely continue to attract the talents to Singapore, okay, and definitely continue to do well. And not just in terms of economic strength in this region, but also the young population. I think young population is very important. The world is just aging because our birth rate is just not as strong. But we do know that the younger the population, the stronger the economic growth, because these are the people that's working and generating, GDP for the country. And that's the reason why also Singapore is very worried, because our fertility rates are at all-time low. But we're lucky because we're able to attract, again, all the good talents from around the region. But if you look where, the young population is being centered around in the world, that is the reason why I'm very optimistic. All right. We leave out Africa, which obviously has the youngest, medium ages continent as compared to the world. It's still quite an untested territory. They are young, but it's still very, very, very developing. But if we look into the 20s, this is where Asia has the largest concentration, all the way from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. China is the one that is the odd one out that is aging, but just purely from the fact that it has a sizable population, that's still, in terms of absolute number of young, working adults, it will still be very, very substantial in 2030, 2040. But in terms of medium ages, India, and the entire Southeast Asia is in yellow. Over here, you can see in the 20 plus range. And we have so many upcoming countries, not just Indonesia. I think Philippines itself and Vietnam, they are all very, very strong. Just also from the pure fact that I'm interacting with some of these tenants, they are very, good working professionals now, very, very educated. So all these are upcoming countries, and I can only be more and more excited and optimistic for Singapore moving forward. So I thought I'd share a little about these mega trends that I really believe in. In the 1800s, you'll see that colonialism and imperialism, it's like the main theme. And the Eurozone, we look at Spain, Portugal, France, even UK, dominating the whole world, taking controls of different countries and operating, their satellite countries, like the Commonwealth zone and things like that. But when we move into the 1900s, that's where you see the euro start to slow down and the rise of US. In the 1900s, when machineries, steam, coal, and everything doing very strongly. But moving into 2000, I feel that there will be a gradual shift in power from the west all the way to the east, and that's where Asia and hopefully Southeast Asia will do better. I think this is a fact that also the West is trying to slow it down, but we can't, change this team per se because of where the growth is coming from, the population, and also from the young population that I talk about. So when we look at this chart, we look at Swiss franc, how Swiss franc has fared. I think since 20 years ago until now, if you look at this, despite the fact that Sing dollar has already done very well against the other peers, but we still lose out to Swiss franc. This shows how important a gold standard currency is. And Swiss franc has been the gold standard for the longest time, not just in Europe, but also the world. But moving forward, I think I read a lot of articles and I also believe, and it's also confirmed by the last 20 years trend, that the Sing dollar would be probably, and it's probably now already the Swiss franc standard for Asia. So if this continues to be true, and with the growth centered more towards Asia and Southeast Asia, I think Sing dollar will continue to appreciate. So if you are buying into Singapore, you must have the confidence that we will definitely do well, and your currency will actually help you create a second wealth effect, not just from property price appreciation alone. So congrats to those who have already hold multiple properties, and to those who haven't started on their journey, just want you to have the confidence and to be very optimistic when looking into Singapore properties. All right, thank you, and I'll see you for the next one.